You've probably heard it a lot, right? The idea of the Holy Family as refugees. It's a really powerful image that connects an ancient story to our world today. But is it actually historically accurate? Well, that's what we're here to find out. Let's peel back the layers. So, we're going to start with a question you've almost certainly heard before. It's one that takes a 2,000-year-old story and puts it right into today's headlines.
And there it is. Were Jesus, Mary, and Joseph refugees? It sounds like such a simple question, doesn't it? But you'll see the answer is, well, it's complicated. It forces us to dig into history, politics, and even what our words really mean.
And you can see why the parallel is so strong. A family fleeing a murderous tyrant to save their child. I mean, that resonates with all of us deeply. But to really get what was going on, we need to put away our modern maps and, pull out one from the first century. Okay, so let's jump back in time. To get to the bottom of our question, we first have to understand the world the Holy Family actually lived in. And spoiler alert, it was a very different place from the world we know today. What's really crucial to see here is the political setup. By the time Jesus was born, both Judea and Egypt were firmly under the control of one single superpower, the Roman Empire. So you gotta stop thinking of them as separate countries. It was more like they were different states, all under one big federal government. And this chart just spells it out perfectly. Today, when we think of international travel, we're thinking about passports, visas, border control, the whole deal. But back in the first century Roman Empire, nope, none of that existed. Moving from Judea to Egypt was a lot more like driving from, say, California to Arizona than it was like flying from the US to Mexico. So, here's the key takeaway. Yes, they were leaving the area controlled by King Herod, but they were never leaving the Roman Empire. They were just moving from one administrative zone to another, all under the same Roman umbrella. And that brings us to the most important historical distinction. Their flight, and believe me, it was absolutely perilous, was technically an act of internal relocation. They were moving inside one single massive empire. And that little detail becomes a very big deal when we start looking at the words we use. Okay, now let's get into the words themselves, because the specific terms we throw around today, they carry a ton of legal and historical weight, and we really need to unpack that. The big concept we need to wrap our heads around is this: anachronism. It's basically a fancy word for when we take a modern idea, like our very specific legal definition of a refugee, and we try to force it onto a past that played by a completely different set of rules.
Just look at this breakdown. The term refugee isn't just about running away from danger. The really critical part is that it involves crossing a recognized international border. And in the modern legal sense, it requires you to be formally recognized by another country or an international group. Now, terms like flight or exile, sure, they describe the act of leaving, but they don't have that specific legal status attached.
Actually, our whole legal system for what makes someone a refugee is pretty new. It was really born out of the chaos of the world wars in the 20th century. So back in the Roman world of the first century, this specific legal category, it just flat out didn't exist. Now, moving beyond the politics and the legal definitions, the story in the Bible itself presents a situation that's, well, it's pretty unique. It doesn't really follow the usual patterns of people fleeing danger. If you look at the narrative, every single major move they make, the reason Herod is angry, the warning to get out of town, and even the all-clear signal to come back, is kicked off by a direct, supernatural message. Joseph isn't acting on rumors or political news. He's following divine instructions from an angel in a dream. And that really sets their situation apart. The story describes a very specific threat aimed at one particular child that was communicated through a personal warning to one single family. This is way different from, a mass exodus of people fleeing a widespread famine or a war that's affecting everybody in their community. So, after all that, looking at the Roman world, the meaning of our words, the specifics of the biblical story, you gotta ask, why does any of this matter? Why is making this distinction so important? What's the big deal? And let's be crystal clear about something. The point of all this is absolutely not to downplay the danger they were in. Fleeing a violent king who wants to kill your child is a terrifying life or death situation. No question about it. It doesn't matter what label you put on it. The goal here is simply precision. It's about being careful with our language so we can get a clearer, more accurate picture of their real journey and their real world. At the end of the day, it's about respecting the past for what it was, not trying to force it into our modern-day boxes.
And that leaves us with this final, really critical thought. When we apply our modern labels to events in the past, what do we gain in that emotional connection? And what crucial details, what important nuance might we be losing in historical truth? It's a powerful reminder that the words we choose don't just describe history, they actively shape how we understand it and how we decide to use it today.